Hey, what's up, guys? I'm back with kind of something different tonight. Now, I've done little lists like this before, and they seem to do okay. And, considering that I like to talk about music and bands, and, well, it takes a long time to make a video about one specific group or whatever I'm working on. So I kind of thought maybe I can do these videos, throw a lot of different groups out there, and if there's something you want to hear more about, well, then I can focus on it that way. Because I am just full of this kind of stuff, and I like recommending groups, and so I thought these kind of underrated bands or top five forgotten groups, whatever I decide to do, I thought it'd be a good way to kind of just hang out with you guys. So anyways, guys, please like this video, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, and drop me your underrated or forgotten bands below. Let's get to it. 5 underrated 90s alternative bands. Catherine Wheel was formed in the UK at Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft, I hope I said that right. And like most other bands on this list, they did go on to change their sound down the line. Yet Catherine Wheel did kind of also sputter into the 2000s before disbanding. Although with Catherine Wheel, we get a group that I always felt should have been way bigger. They were well renowned in the scene and whatnot, but they were never a mainstream success like some of their peers. I first heard of these guys from Greg Araki. Bless that dude. And being in his movies as a kid, well, it got me into a lot of music, most notably like Slow Dive, obviously. But in Greg Araki's Teen Apocalypse installment Nowhere, he decided to use a B-side from Catherine Wheel called Intravenous, a track I always felt displayed the group's best tendencies. What a soundtrack, by the way. But they first got their notoriety as part of John Peel's early Peel sessions. This was the early 90s, and they did get a lot of touring and whatnot. They toured a lot with Smashing Pumpkins, and they got some decent MTV exposure for a band like this, at least. And they got a lot of music videos, too. I do think, however, that they were a group that needed that core original lineup the whole time. And sadly, the group, they went the way of kind of doing solo stuff and members dropping out here and there and whatever, it happens. As by the band's last album, it was pretty much just one or two members, and they kind of changed the name, sort of. Their last album saw the band add "the" to their name, which technically made them the Catherine Wheel for his sole album. But with their debut album Ferment, well, that one has just stood the test of time and is regarded as a shoegaze classic. Although it is heavy on the quote-unquote alternative side, and sadly the shoegaze elements would largely be gone by their second album. I've always felt everything after their first record was, I don't know, a little narratively off or something, but it's still some very interesting alternative music for the time. And you'd think they would go the way of other bands of their ilk like Oasis, Blur, Slow Dive, or even Ride. However, while Catherine Wheel's sound did drastically change, it was all largely under the same umbrella thanks to songwriter and singer Rob Dickinson. Fun fact, Rob Dickinson is also Bruce Dickinson's cousin. Yes, that Bruce Dickinson. While most bands from their era eventually got back together, like Slow Dive, Lush, Swerve Driver, Catherine Wheel never did regroup. Although there is plenty of online fandom that wants it. Recently, there was a cryptic Catherine Wheel posting online that got all of us fans into a frenzy thinking a reunion was coming, but instead we just got a remastered single. You can still keep up with the bass player Dave on social media, cool dude, and I always felt he was an integral part of the band. And, something was just largely missing when he departed the group. Lead singer Rob went on to release some solo stuff, and I'm really guessing the reunion would need to be his prerogative if it ever did happen. However, the guy's way too into his cars and whatnot, it seems. Catherine Wheel's just a nice little gem in the 90s musical landscape. I recommend the tracks Intravenous, Black Metallic, and Salt. So yeah, a few bands on this list did start in the 80s. Chapter House got things rolling in Reading, Berkshire, England in early 1987, but their legendary album Whirlpool would be released in 1999. I'm going to talk about a few bands on this list and some upcoming lists, I'm sure, that may have a lot in common, to say the least, especially when dealing with the shoegaze and alternative genre. The shoegaze genre itself tends to lend to evolution of sound early on, if not directly at the start. And it really is a breeding ground for innovation, as we saw multiple bands like Lush and Swerve Driver, and again Slow Dive, drastically change their sounds down the line. in basically opposite ways during their career. But with Chapter House, though, I'd say they kind of changed sounds a bit too drastically a little too early, as they really seemed to delve into the 90s pop, kind of sound and landscape at the time, all for their follow-up album, Blood Music. Which does retain their overall sound here and there, but really, it goes for the looped, more pop route. Though I can't say it isn't a unique album, kind of blending sounds, and at times it sounds something like Big Audio Dynamite or like 90s Jesus Jones or something like that. But while their follow-up wasn't anywhere near the plateau of their original album, Whirlpool, Chapter House would eventually reunite for some shows, even though, they only did last 2 albums in their whole career. 2 albums, though, I consider important to the genre. I mean, Whirlpool just has some iconic shoegaze tracks. But sadly, when it comes to Chapter House, you just never hear about these guys anymore. Okay, let's travel over to the States for the next few selects. Knapsack got going in 1994's California alternative scene, and in my opinion were an early onset to the blooming of emo scenes at the time, at least as far as their sound goes, mixing the youthful yet angry pop-punk aesthetic with a very raw emotional state in the vocals of Blair Sheehan. And to be honest, they kind of have a familiar story, all things considered. Knapsack got going strong with a solid debut and tours and got a lot of promotion on MTV, and also consistently lost members, a story you've heard before. And they followed up their debut with what I consider to be the best of their output, this sophomore Day 3 of My New Life, which saw the group fully mature their sound. While the band, never really drastically changed, I gotta say that the third album, The Conversation Is Ending Starting Right Now, was a little more mellow. A little more mainstream, if you will, but still very Knapsack. And again, familiar stories and all, the group would later reunite for a short time in the late 2015, just for a few shows though, before pretty much disbanding again. But if you ask me, Knapsack left the mark on the landscape, and all these years later, I think their first 2 albums really strike a chord. The Refreshments would get going in 1992's version of Arizona, and it was due to some impressive runs with bands like Gin Blossoms that, they eventually got a major label debut themselves. And the Refreshments are, in my opinion, one of the most definitive 90s bands to ever exist. Their sound, their vibe, their lyrics, it's all just so of the time and really doesn't belong anywhere else. Well, aside from King of the Hill, what a banger theme song. The Refreshments never really carried on past the 90s, although lead singer Roger Clyne went on to form Roger Clyne and the Peacemaker, where they would play some classic tunes along with their new originals. The Refreshments would be referred to as a one-hit wonder by a lot of people and publications, but in fact they're more of a 3-hit or 4-hit wonder, and some real bangers too. Check it out. There are some 90s staples here like Bandidos, Down Together, Nada, all from the legendary 90s powerhouse album Fizzy, Fuzzy, Big and Wuzzy. But the Refreshments somehow seem like a very normal group that just had that spunk, I don't know, strange. The dudes still went through it all. An underwhelming sophomore album, members like Brian Blush leaving due to drugs, all of it. Yet, to mix elements like Western music and straight rock and roll in the landscape of the mid-90s, that was something to behold. And to have a good time while doing it, well, hell yeah. Maybe these dudes were just never meant to last too long. Our last band on the list, I'm not sure if they're exactly forgotten. And I think they may be the most successful group on this list. These dudes were pretty big overseas the entire time they were around. Of course, I'm talking about Ned's Atomic Dust Bin. These dudes played some extremely high-profile shows and were featured in a lot of video games, and they probably toured with Nonpoint or some shit. And the group even covered Saturday Night for the film So I Married an Ex-Murderer, where the entire cast was in the music video. Pretty sweet. Check out my video on So I Married an Ex-Murderer next. Ned's Atomic Dustbin is remembered fondly as a kind of, oddball staple of the genre, really taking the term alternative to its furthest reaches. At times, they would be called a novelty act, but I'm guessing it's because of the group's use of two bass guitars that threw them in that little, I don't know, that it's just wrong to call them a novelty act. These dudes really kick ass. And having two bass guitars, well, it formed a bizarre yet effective use of sound, something that never really was done or never replicated. It really brought the melodies to life. And I don't know, the two bass guitar thing, I guess that element alone it's still fondly looked back at today. But to me, they're just such a 90s group. Everything from the way they look, their sound, and everything that they put out, all their output really exists in that decade. And they lasted through most of that decade and would reunite in the mid-2000s. And these dudes seem to acknowledge their fan base, as they did keep up with, the nostalgia type festivals and whatnot, taking shows here and there for a little while at least, before kind of just calling it quits and starting something called Ned's Acoustic Dustbin, which really blew my mind. Anyways, if you haven't heard Ned's Atomic Dustbin, I'm telling you guys, do it now. Alright, there you have it. 5 forgotten alternative bands from the 90s. I hope you guys learned something here. I hope you guys grew a little bit. And I really hope you go check out these groups. Seriously, every band on this list I absolutely adore. Catherine Will, been one of my favorites for a long time. So I like hearing about new stuff too, guys. So let me know down below what 90s alternative bands I may have forgotten. And if you have any other ideas for lists like this, any genre, anything like that, let me know down below. And stick around, guys. We got a lot of stuff coming on the channel. I'm going to be getting kind of weird with it, getting a little more creative with it. And we have a live stream coming up this week too. So plenty of stuff happening here. Check it out. Hit subscribe. Give this video a like. Check out the Two Corys Forever podcast. All the links down below. Check out whatever videos are floating on the screen right now. Staunch gang, I love you. Peace.